Today's video is going to be taking us to the Park Hill section of Staten Island in New York City. Now, some of the footage you'll be seeing in today's intro is not directly connected to today's story, but it does a good job of showing what the climate was like back in the 80s and 90s out in Park Hill, which shows not only the ups and downs that residents were experiencing at the time, but also shows how the community came together to take a stand. Now, me telling this story right now is not a coincidence. The reason for that is that the person who committed this heinous crime you're about to hear about is eligible for parole this year. In fact, in just a few months. The child that we'll be discussing today doesn't even have so much as a picture attached to her name. In fact, if it wasn't for a few crucial articles, I wouldn't even be able to tell this story properly. But it's all the more reason to share the story, because even if we don't know this child personally or never saw them, they still suffered a horrific end, and that should have never happened. According to documents, her name was pronounced one of two ways. I'll be using the pronunciation, Germaine, just to make sure that I don't mess her name up. Before we move forward, I do have to warn that this video is going to contain some graphic details, many of which are disturbing and will be very hard to make it through. So before you jump in, please keep that in mind. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Listen up. Now we have the opportunity. We have taken a stand here, my brothers and sisters, my Latino American sisters, and anybody that really gives a damn about the situation that's here today. We came here from Park Hill strong. We came here from West Brighton Store strong. All the lower coast of your black communities, ghettos, projects, whatever the hell you want to call it. We're here together.
Six-year-old Germaine DeSaussure resided at 280 Park Hill Ave in Staten Island with her mother and her siblings. She attended St. Sylvester School, just a few minutes away from the family's home. Germaine's mother was described as a hard-working woman who always took care of her children, someone known by neighbors as kind, who didn't have any problems with anyone. The Park Hill area where they resided is still home to many families today, although over the last 4 decades, it's been said that the conditions in these complexes have gotten a lot worse. There are currently plans to improve the living conditions here, something tenants have been outspoken about in recent years and over the decades. The area has seen its fair share of ups and downs, just like many of the neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs back then and today. Everything from violence, drugs, corruption, and gang activity. Eventually, the area would become known to many as Killer Hill, home to members of the legendary Wu-Tang Clan. Killer Hill is also the name of a docuseries released earlier this year featuring some of the members. The classic bars you've been hearing for the last more than 3 decades, many of them inspired by their experiences right here. The lyrics offer a window into their reality. You'll find residents who've known each other their whole lives in the area, forming close bonds and a strong sense of community over the years, despite hardships. Many just trying to do good and raise their families, Germaine's being one of them. Now normally, I would love to come on here and tell you all about what Germaine was like and what she was known for, maybe what she was like at school. But unfortunately, that information is very hard to come by. Most of the information surrounding her brief life involves her final moments. And as I mentioned, not so much as a photo. From this moment forward, I'll be focusing on the tragic events that unfolded on February 1st of 1981, Germaine's very last day on this earth. On this day, Germaine was home with her mother and her siblings. It was a typical Sunday afternoon at the Park Hill houses. It was mostly calm, with residents taking it easy as they prepared their kids for school the next day and mentally prepared themselves for the coming work week. According to reports, Germaine's mother wanted to go to the store to purchase a pack of cigarettes, but had her hands full with the kids. She decided to send Germaine. Now, of course, a store shouldn't even be selling cigarettes to a child, seeing as how it was most definitely illegal and just a bad idea in general, but it's something you would see often back in the day. Now, it wasn't right, but it wasn't uncommon to see kids buying things like beers and Lucy's for their parents or other adults on store runs. The store owners knew the parents, and a lot of times just let it happen, since they didn't think these kids were getting it for themselves. It wasn't clear if she had ever ran this type of errand before, but when her mother told her to go, that's what she did. She made her way down in the elevator and exited the building to make her way to a nearby grocery store. This was said to be a little before 4:30 p.m. Once Germaine was out of the building, her mother looked on from their 6th floor window, watching as the child approached the corner. She yelled down, letting her know when it was okay to cross the street, since she had a good view of the road from their window. She would then watch as she crossed Park Hill Avenue and headed in the direction of the store. Her mother waited a few minutes while she made the purchase and could hear Germaine yell for her from the street, letting her know she was on her way back. They repeated the process. Her mother told her when it was okay to cross back over, and she watched as Germaine made her way back across Park Hill Avenue, coming back toward the building. Once she was almost at the front, she left the window and exited the apartment to go meet her daughter. Her mother went to the elevator and waited for her to come up, but the elevator stopped on another floor first. She pressed the button to call for it, and when the elevator reached their floor, it was empty. At that moment, panic and confusion set in. There was no reason for Germaine to not be in this elevator when she just saw her entering the building just a few seconds ago. She immediately ran downstairs, checking the lobby, the laundry room, and the floor the elevator previously stopped on, but there was no sign of Germaine. She took the elevator back to the 6th floor, entering one of the staircases, screaming her daughter's name. It was then that she heard a scream coming from another staircase in the building, a scream she instantly knew was her daughter, and it sounded like it was coming from above her, like it was coming from the roof. She made her way there while cradling one of her other children, who was only 6 months old at the time, since she didn't want to leave her unattended. She ran as fast as she could and would come to find one person on that roof other than herself, someone she described as a big man. She didn't see his face, but could clearly see him as he ran away, pulling the straps to his overalls up and adjusting them. She thought she recognized him from his body type and how he moved, but she couldn't be positive since it was all unraveling so quickly. He was making his way to another door on the roof that faced the front of the building, and within seconds, he was gone. There was no sign of Germaine anywhere on that roof, but she was certain the screams came from here. She made her way back down to the lobby in a frantic state and told neighbors what she saw. She said the man she thought she saw on the roof was 19-year-old Clark Anthony Williams, a neighbor who lived in that same building on the 2nd floor. A neighbor stated she also heard screams from one of the stairwells. After hearing those screams for a second time, the neighbor stated she saw Germaine crying in front of her apartment door. It's unclear if she tried to do anything to help the child. This was said to be around the exact moment her mother heard those screams while looking for her. The neighbor looked out of her apartment door again a few minutes later, but Germaine was gone. She would then see the child's mother and another neighbor, unaware at first that they were searching for Germaine, who she had just seen crying a few minutes before. By now, a few neighbors had been alerted about the missing girl and placed calls to police. It was then that the neighbor who had seen the child crying went to another neighbor's apartment and looked out of the window after hearing a commotion. To her absolute horror, she would see a child's body lying in the dirt in the courtyard behind the building, and she was bleeding out. It was Germaine, and nobody had a clue on how she got there. The child's mother and neighbors ran downstairs, where they would find little Germaine still clinging to life. She was only partially clothed, with her shoes and stockings just feet away from her. Her body looked crushed, and she had suffered terrible injuries. The neighbor took the child's belongings and gave them to her husband to hold on to while she accompanied Germaine's mother to Staten Island Hospital, where Germaine was taken. A Staten Island ambulance crew tried to revive her as they made their way there, but by the time they got to the hospital, doctors would come to find the child's body horribly battered and with little they could do. In a horrible turn of events, 6-year-old Germaine, who had just come back from the store not long before this, was now dead. She was pronounced deceased at around 5:30 p.m., barely an hour after she left her home. Germaine's father, who wasn't around when it all happened, would learn of the devastating news later on. In the hour that Germaine was attacked and her life came to an end, Police were conducting an investigation over at the building, asking everyone questions and canvassing the areas nearby. As her parents and loved ones struggled with this sudden tragedy, by complete chance, a detective who had been at 280 Park Hill Ave for a totally unrelated issue would find himself engaging in casual conversation with someone in the lobby, and it just so happened to be Clark Anthony Williams. The conversation revolved around one of the elevators being out of service. It was shortly after that neighbors would inform that detective and another officer that the man they suspect had been on that roof when Germaine was heard screaming was a man named Tony, referring to Clark since he used that name as a nickname often. They directed them to the second-floor apartment that he shared with his mother and his 3 sisters. They went and knocked on the family's door, and his mother opened, but there wasn't any cooperation. They asked for a photo of her son, and she slammed the door in their faces. This only made them focus on Williams even more. Authorities blocked off every exit in the building to ensure that he would have no way of escaping. After a few minutes, a sergeant was able to finally talk Williams' mother into opening the door. First thing they did was ask to speak to her son. And when he came out of that room, he was 6'5" and weighed about 230 pounds. Some reports even had him weighing as much as 280, what detectives described as a hulking figure. They told him they needed him to come down to the station to discuss something that took place in the building. He agreed to go with them willingly. Williams was referred to as a patient of the South Beach Psychiatric Center, where he received treatments for mental issues, someone who was mostly by himself whenever neighbors saw him around. He would try to play with some of the kids in the building, but they didn't like it because he was so rough with them. It wasn't made clear why a 6'5", 230-pound man playing with children was even a thing, but apparently it was. Police would question Williams for several hours, and finally, he made a confession, revealing exactly what he did to little Germaine. According to him, he saw when Germaine left the building and crossed the street with her to the store when she went to make the purchase. Of course, this goes against what her mother stated. She made it clear that Germaine was alone when she left and when she returned. She guided her across the street and back. He likely knew about the store because he asked Germaine where she was going when he saw her leaving. This also makes sense because the neighbor stated she saw William standing outside about 20 minutes before Germaine exited the building. He said that once they were back at the building, he walked with her to the 6th floor where she lived, but instead of letting her walk to her apartment, he put his hands over her mouth and carried her up to the roof. Once he reached the roof, he would begin tearing the child's clothes off, proceeding to savagely violate her. Germaine would try to fight him off and screamed for help, the same screams her mother heard. She was able to run away briefly, which would be around the same time that neighbor saw her crying in front of her apartment door. Knowing that people would hear the commotion, Williams would take her back up to the roof and over to the edge of the building. That's when he took her and threw her small body off the side, causing her to crash 6 stories to the pavement below. He took the clothes that he had ripped off her body earlier and threw them right behind her. Those would have been the articles of clothing that a neighbor held onto. The confession was sickening enough, but to ensure that his story added up when it came to the crime itself, they would take Williams back to 280 Park Hill Ave. When they got there, while handcuffed in the back of a police vehicle, he would look out of the window and point at the rooftop. "That's where I threw the girl and the shoes from," he said. It's unclear if Germaine walked with Williams up the stairs from the lobby, or if she took the elevator and was taken out of it at some point as she made her way up. They also weren't sure if maybe the attack really started in the lobby of 280. All that is known for sure is that she was so close to home, but she never made it there. As neighbors frantically searched, she was just feet away from her apartment on the roof with this monster. It would take but a few moments before a normal winter Sunday at the Park Hill houses was transformed into a scene of overwhelming grief. An innocent child's life snatched away in the most horrible way imaginable. After 6 hours total of questioning, Williams was charged with violating Germaine and murder. The next morning, Williams would appear at Stapleton Criminal Court, and he was said to have a grin on his face, as if he had absolutely no remorse. He was read his charges and held without bail. A legal aid attorney would say that his client had a psychiatric history, including brain trauma from an accident involving a car when he was a kid, something he was still undergoing treatment for. He would then say that he questioned if Williams' signed confession was in fact legitimate, due to the fact that his client couldn't answer questions properly. He blamed this on his mental state. From the very beginning, an insanity plea was the route his defense was taking. It turns out that when he was arrested for his vile acts against Germaine, he was already facing charges for another violent crime. His charges stemmed from an incident on January 14th of 1981 at 280 Park Hill Ave, barely a month before he took this child's life. It was stated that he stabbed a man in the face. He was supposed to be back in court on February 25th, 1981 for that crime. It would be after that arrest that he was sent to Bellevue, followed by the South Beach Psychiatric Center for outpatient care, meaning that someone decided he didn't require an overnight stay. He was then set free as he waited to go back to court, leaving an unpredictable and extremely violent individual to roam free on the grounds. Had he never been allowed back home after his violent attack on that man in January, Germaine would still be alive today. By November later that year, a trial was already underway. Williams' lawyer stated that after a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined his client suffered from, quote, mild organic brain syndrome, and again referenced a history of brain trauma. He said Williams also had difficulties with his speech, all due to the auto accident he had as a child, but that evaluation also determined that Williams did not show any signs of suffering from psychosis. In other words, regardless of whatever his lawyer was trying to get at, it was irrelevant, because Williams knew exactly what he was doing. Germaine's mother would be one of 6 witnesses to take the stand and testify before a jury. Her voice cracked and her eyes welled up with tears as she described those final moments searching for her daughter and describing when she came across her battered body in that courtyard. Another witness, a detective close to the case, couldn't help but cry as she read Williams' confession. Her voice trembled as she tried her best to keep her composure. Others detailed what they saw and heard, and by all accounts, it was obvious that Williams did this, despite his lawyer attempting to come up with an alibi defense. After everything they had heard in that courtroom and his violent past, it was clear to a jury that Williams was capable of anything, and the evidence made it even more clear that he was guilty. The defense's attempt to take the responsibility away from Williams would fail. On Thursday, December 10th of 1981, Clark Anthony Williams was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But even with his confession, and after being convicted of one of the worst crimes to ever be committed in the entire Staten Island, he's been eligible for parole since April of this year, 2025. He'll be up for parole once again in November of this year, just under 3 months from the release of this video. This monster should never go free. Germaine's life was ended in cold blood, and she didn't get a second chance. Neither should he. What took place at the Park Hill houses in February of 1981 will leave the entire community shaken and parents holding on to their children a little tighter. A disturbing and truly tragic incident that ended with a child suffering a horrific end. For many, one of the most tragic parts of this story was the fact that a sick and depraved individual with a violent past was free at all. He posed a threat to that community in general. That was known and proven. He should have had no access to this child. Just like in the case of Eton Pates 2 years earlier, many felt that a child shouldn't have been left unsupervised because you never know who's lurking or what dangers lie ahead. But it's safe to assume that nobody expects this horrifying outcome. It's something that no parent or resident should even have to consider. A child should be able to play with their friends and be safe in their community. Believe it or not, there was a time when it was possible. A run to the store should never end with a first grader being hurled off a rooftop after a savage attack. The actions of one cruel individual do not represent an entire community, a place filled with families just looking to thrive, a place with people who have always told true stories about their reality, a community with ups and downs in the city, just like many others. Crimes in this city is an age-old tale, but some crimes just can't be forgiven. Scattered throughout my city, your city, whatever county or town you may be in, anywhere that you decide to look, there's most likely a story just like the one you heard today. There are areas where monsters quietly roam, just waiting for an opportunity. This wasn't gang-related, it wasn't retaliation, it wasn't something that erupted from conflict in the streets, and it wasn't related to the drug game. If you grew up in the city or one like it, in certain areas, this is what we grow used to. But what was done to that child was vile and heartless in every way. An entirely different type of evil altogether. An act that only true monsters are capable of. And they're given that opportunity time and time and time and time again. Germaine's mother would relocate from Staten Island after her daughter's slaying. If alive today, Germaine would be 50 years old. Rest in peace, Germaine DeSaussure, and my deepest condolences go out to her family. You aren't forgotten.